A New Year at Ashcombe. Chapter 1. The Quiet Choice. The new year came to Ashcombe Vale as it always did, without a crowd, without music, without the brittle cheer that seemed to Clara Ellison more like an obligation than a joy. Snow had begun falling before midnight, drifting in soft layers against the hedgerows and stone walls until the entire valley appeared smoothed by a patient hand. At dawn, the sky held the pale blush of winter, pink-grey at the horizon, fading into a cool, gentle white. Smoke curled from the Ellisons' chimney in a single, steady ribbon, the only sign that the cottage was awake. Clara stood at the parlour window, her fingertips resting lightly against the sill, watching the snow settle upon the garden gate and the bare apple tree. The glass was cold beneath her touch. She did not mind it. She had always loved the quiet moments when the world seemed honest. In London, quiet had never lasted. Even the silence between notes at a musicale felt arranged, an interval for admiration rather than contemplation. Here, silence belonged to no one. It asked nothing of her, required no smile, no clever remark, no performance. Behind her, the soft rasp of wool announced her mother's approach. "You will turn to ice if you remain there much longer," Mrs. Ellison said gently, and draped a shawl around Clara's shoulders with practiced care. Her mother's hair, once a rich chestnut, had faded into a dignified silver that suited the calm steadiness of her manner. Widowhood had not broken her, it had refined her, as winter refines a landscape. Clara smiled faintly. "It is the beginning of the year," she said. "It feels untouched, as though the world has been washed clean." Mrs. Ellison studied her daughter's profile, the calm line of her brow, the thoughtful set of her mouth. "You have always been drawn to beginnings," she said, "because you like the idea that something may be different." Clara turned from the window. "It may be different," she replied, though she did not fully know to whom she spoke, her mother, herself, or the year. They had come to Ashcombe Vale 3 years earlier, and though the decision had been framed as a change of air, it had been, if Clara were honest, an escape. London had been a lesson she had not asked for and never wished to repeat. She had not been a failure, precisely. She had danced when required, spoken politely when presented to someone of consequence, and endured calls and assemblies with composure. But she had done it all with the sensation of wearing someone else's skin. She found society's flattering attentions unnerving and its cruelties far too casual. She found the constant weighing of every word exhausting. The warmth offered by acquaintances often cooled the moment. Advantage shifted elsewhere. "I feel as though I am being taught how to be admired," she had confessed to her mother after a particularly splendid dinner, at which she had been praised for her quietness, as though it were a pleasing decoration. "But I do not wish to be admired in that way. It seems like a sort of captivity." Mrs. Ellison, who had once known society's glitter and later its betrayals, had listened without argument. Within 2 months, they had departed the city. Ashcombe Vale had offered them a modest cottage, a small village with more honesty than gossip, and a life built on routine rather than display. Clara read widely, sketched the lanes and trees, and walked daily, regardless of the season. Her mother wrote letters, kept the household, and cultivated friendships of substance rather than convenience. Together, they had made a quiet sanctuary. It was a sanctuary Clara defended fiercely, though she seldom spoke of it in such terms. That New Year's morning, after breakfast, she wrapped herself in her cloak and pulled her bonnet low. Mrs. Ellison lifted an eyebrow in the way that always conveyed both permission and gentle warning. "You will not go to the wooded rise," her mother said. Clara's smile was innocent. "I shall not go far." "Not far, in your estimation, can still be far," Mrs. Ellison returned, but she kissed her daughter's cheek and let her go. Outside, the cold was crisp and clean. The lane lay empty, bordered by hedges bowed under snow. Clara's boots crunched in a steady rhythm, the sound oddly comforting. She breathed deeply, feeling the winter air sharpen her thoughts. She had gone perhaps 20 minutes when the world changed. It was not a dramatic change, not thunder or a shout, but a detail out of place. Something dark against the white, near the bend where the lane narrowed and the trees began to arch overhead. At first, she thought it a fallen branch. Then she saw the horse. It lay on its side beside the hedge, its breath visible in faint, irregular clouds. Its bridle strap trailed across the snow, and a saddle lay half submerged in the drift. Clara's heart tightened. A fallen horse in winter was never a good sign. And then she saw him. A man lay a few yards away, near the ditch, sprawled at an unnatural angle. His coat, dark, fine, travel-worn, was dusted with snow. His hair, nearly black, was strewn across his forehead. One glove had come off. His bare hand lay palm up, fingers slightly curled, as though even unconsciousness could not fully persuade him to release whatever he had been holding. Clara froze, her mind racing. Then she ran. Her skirts caught the snow as she dropped to her knees beside him. "Sir?" she called, her voice unsteady despite her effort. "Sir, can you hear me?" No response. She reached for his wrist, pressing her fingers to his pulse. It was there, faint, uneven, but present. Relief struck so sharply she nearly swayed. His face was pale, his lips tinged slightly blue from the cold. A cut at his temple had bled, and the blood had darkened against the snow. His arm was bent beneath him in a manner that made Clara's stomach lurch. She could not lift him alone. She could not leave him. Her breath came fast. She looked around, but the lane was empty. The woods were still. She made a decision, without thinking. She stood and ran back the way she had come, her lungs burning, her hands numb, her cloak flapping behind her like a torn banner. At the nearest farm, she hammered at the door until Mr. Hargreaves answered, alarmed by her distress. Within moments, he and his eldest son were loading blankets into a cart, harnessing a sturdy pony, and setting out with brisk determination. Clara climbed onto the cart without being asked, unable to remain behind. When they reached the bend again, Mr. Hargreaves muttered something under his breath and crossed himself quickly, less from superstition than instinctive unease. The sight of a man cast down in snow always carried the weight of mortality. They worked carefully, lifting the stranger with as much gentleness as the situation allowed. Clara held the blanket edges while they wrapped him, her hands trembling now that help had arrived. They brought the horse to, dragging it to its feet with effort, guiding it slowly. It limped, but remained upright. By the time they reached the cottage, Mrs. Ellison was already in the doorway, her face composed, her eyes sharp with concern. She did not scold. She did not panic. She only said, "Bring him in," and stepped aside. The spare chamber was small but warm. They laid him on the bed. Mrs. Ellison began giving orders with quiet authority. Water warmed, cloths fetched, fire stoked higher, clean sheets aired. Clara moved as if pulled by invisible strings, obeying without question. When the village surgeon arrived, he examined the stranger with practiced gravity. He set the broken arm, cleaned the wound, and checked the man's breathing. His expression remained guarded. "He is fortunate," the surgeon said at last. "A head wound can be treacherous, but he has not fractured the skull. His arm is broken cleanly. He will recover, if fever does not take him." Clara swallowed. "And if fever does?" The surgeon gave her a look that carried the blunt honesty of his profession. "Then we shall do what we can." He instructed them carefully. Keep him warm, wake him enough to swallow small amounts of broth, watch for delirium. And when he left, Clara stood in the doorway of the sick room, staring at the stranger whose life had been placed in their hands as though by the will of the new year itself. She had chosen a quiet life, but the year, it seemed, had chosen otherwise. Chapter 2. The Stranger Under Their Roof. The first night passed with little change. Clara sat by the bed in the narrow chair, the candle flame trembling slightly as air shifted near the hearth. She listened to the stranger's breathing, watched the rise and fall of his chest, and tried not to imagine what might happen if it stopped. At intervals, she rose to change the cloth on his temple, to check his pulse, to press a warm brick wrapped in linen near his feet. Outside, snow continued to fall, as though the world meant to bury every trace of disturbance. At dawn, he stirred. It began with a faint sound, a small groan that might have been a dream. Clara leaned forward at once. "Sir," she whispered. His eyelids fluttered, his brow furrowed with pain. He attempted to move and gave a sharp hiss as his broken arm protested. "Do not," Clara said quickly, placing a steady hand against his shoulder. "Please, you are safe, but you are hurt." His eyes opened fully then, grey, intelligent, startled by confusion. He looked at her, and for a moment Clara felt as though the room had narrowed to nothing but that gaze. "Where?" he managed. "You are at Ashcombe Vale," she said gently. "My mother and I found you in the snow. You fell." He swallowed, grimacing. "My horse." "Alive," Clara replied. "Bruised, but alive. It is sheltered." Relief passed through his face with unmistakable sincerity. He closed his eyes briefly as if gathering himself, then opened them again. "Thank you," he said, the words strained but deliberate. From that moment, his recovery began in earnest. The next days unfolded in careful rhythm. Mrs. Ellison and Clara took turns. Clara fed him broth, offered water, and read aloud when he was awake enough to listen. Often he slept, slipping into dreams that tugged at him uneasily. On the third night, fever threatened. His skin flushed, his breath rapid. Clara sat by him with the cold cloth, her heart clenched, refusing to move until the fever broke near dawn. When he regained clearer awareness, he looked around the modest room with confusion that slowly shifted into curiosity. "This is not an inn," he murmured one afternoon, his voice stronger. "You are not hired nurses." "No," Clara replied with a faint smile. "We are simply what the road provided." His mouth curved slightly. "And it provided me a great deal more kindness than I deserved." Clara did not know what to say to that. Kindness to her was not a currency to be earned. It was a decision. He watched her closely over the following days, as though trying to understand her. She was not flirtatious. She did not turn coy when he thanked her. She spoke plainly and with quiet confidence. She moved with the economy of someone unaccustomed to an audience. It unsettled him in a way Clara could not yet name. On the 5th day he asked, "What is your name?" "Clara Ellison," she replied. "And your mother?" "Mrs. Ellison." He seemed almost amused at their simplicity. "No other title?" "We have none that matter," Clara said calmly. That answer earned her a long look. He did not offer his own name at once. It came later, after he had gained enough strength to sit upright for longer periods, and after Mrs. Ellison had made it clear, without any rudeness, that her household valued honesty. One evening, as firelight flickered against the wall and snow tapped softly at the window, he said, "My name is Julian Harcourt." Clara inclined her head. "Mr. Harcourt." He hesitated, then continued, "I was travelling to my uncle's estate. He has recently inherited the title of Earl of Winthrop." Clara paused, only for a breath. She had fled society, and society had pursued her into her own cottage in the shape of an earl's nephew. But she did not show alarm. "I see," she said simply. His gaze sharpened. "You are not impressed." "I have never found titles to be a guarantee of character," Clara replied, her voice mild but steady. Julian looked as though he might laugh, but the sound did not come. Instead, he studied her as if she had become suddenly more interesting. "I returned from the continent only recently," he said. "France, Italy. I intended to arrive quietly. Instead, I seem to have arrived inconveniently." Clara's lips curved. "You arrived injured, that is all." The days that followed were different. Now that he was no longer merely a patient, conversation found its way into the room like sunlight. Julian spoke of travel cautiously at first, avoiding boastfulness. He spoke of Florence at dusk, of the sea at Marseille, of quiet villages where life felt slower. He had seen the world, but it had not made him arrogant. If anything, it seemed to have made him weary of spectacle. Clara found herself listening with interest she did not mean to feel. When he asked why she lived in the country, Clara hesitated. Mrs. Ellison was in the room, sewing by the fire, her needle moving steadily. Clara could not lie. "I disliked society," she said simply. It felt artificial. Every conversation seemed to carry a hidden purpose. Julian's expression shifted. Recognition, perhaps. "And you?" Clara asked, surprising herself. Julian's gaze drifted toward the window, where the world beyond remained white and quiet. "I have known too much of both," he admitted. "The polished surface and the truths beneath it, they do not always match." In those weeks, Ashcombe Vale became an odd place of intimacy, a small cottage holding a life that ought to have remained separate from it. Clara and Julian read together in the evenings, sometimes aloud, sometimes silently, in companionable quiet. He watched her sketch, and when she offered to sketch him, he refused, saying, "I am still too much a stranger to myself to sit for a portrait." Clara understood more than he realized. Yet even in their growing comfort, a shadow remained. Julian could not stay. The world beyond the hedgerows would come, sooner or later, to claim him. Clara pretended she did not mind, but she began to notice how the room felt different when he was asleep, how the silence took on a heavier weight, how she found herself listening for his voice even when she told herself she should not. One evening, when the snow finally ceased and the sky cleared to a bitter cold, Julian said quietly, "I owe you my life." Clara looked up from her sewing. "You owe us nothing but your recovery." He shook his head slightly. "No, you did not have to stop. You did not have to take me in. You could have left me to be found by someone else." "But no one else had found you," Clara said. Julian's gaze held hers. "That is the point." Clara's hands still. For a moment, she felt as though something unspoken had come too close to the surface. Then Mrs. Ellison cleared her throat softly, not as interruption, but as gentle reminder of boundaries. Clara resumed her sewing, her cheeks warm. Julian did not press further. But later that night, when Clara lay awake in her room, she realized with quiet terror that she could no longer imagine the cottage without him. Chapter 3. The world intrudes. The first sign that their sanctuary would not endure came not in the form of a carriage, but a letter. It arrived one morning in late January, carried by a village boy whose cheeks were red from the cold. Clara took it at the door, noting at once the quality of the paper and the seal pressed in dark wax. Julian was in the parlour, seated carefully, his arm still bound, though healing. He looked up as she entered and saw the letter. His face changed. Clara did not need to ask how he knew. Some things were understood by instinct. He held out his hand. "May I?" Clara gave him the letter, her stomach tight. He broke the seal and read quickly. As he read, his jaw clenched. "It is my uncle," he said at last. Mrs. Ellison, seated near the hearth, did not speak. She only watched. Julian folded the letter. "He has been searching for me. He was told my horse was seen, injured, wandering near the vale. He deduced I had not gone far." Clara's pulse quickened. He will come. Julian looked at her. Yes. The carriage arrived 2 days later, on a grey morning that made the snow look like ash. It was not ostentatious, but it was unmistakably grand compared to the humble lane. The crest on the door, an intricate device, caught what little light there was. Clara stood at the parlour window as it rolled to a stop outside. Julian stood beside her, very still. Mrs. Ellison remained seated, her posture straight, her expression calm, but watchful. A man stepped down first, older, dignified, dressed with the restrained elegance of a gentleman who required no excessive display. Behind him came a servant who looked faintly scandalized by the modest surroundings. Julian exhaled slowly. "He is not unkind," he murmured, almost as if to reassure himself. "But he is fixed." The Earl of Winthrop entered the cottage with the air of someone determined not to appear surprised by anything, though Clara saw his gaze flick briefly over the small space. "Mr. Harcourt," the Earl said, and there was relief beneath his formality. He stepped forward and clasped Julian's uninjured hand. "You have frightened us." Julian's expression softened slightly. "I did not intend to." The Earl turned to Mrs. Ellison and Clara with measured courtesy. "Madam, Miss Ellison, I owe you a debt for your care." Mrs. Ellison inclined her head. "You owe us nothing but the comfort of knowing he is safe." Clara noticed Julian glance at her, as though struck again by how little her mother valued performance. The Earl's gaze settled on Clara for a brief moment, longer than required. Not improper, simply assessing. It made Clara's skin prickle. She had endured such gazes in London. She had not expected one in her parlour. "Your kindness does you credit," the Earl said. Julian remained quiet. His body was present, but his mind seemed pulled in two directions, toward the world he had left and toward the quiet refuge he had found. After a brief conversation, the Earl said gently but firmly, "You must come to Winthrop Hall. Your recovery will be better managed there, and the household requires reassurance." Julian's jaw tightened. "I am well enough to travel." "You will travel carefully," the Earl replied, "and with proper attendance." Clara felt an unexpected stab of loss so sharp it nearly made her dizzy. She lowered her eyes at once, ashamed of the emotion. Julian looked toward her, just once, but the look carried the weight of farewell. That afternoon, while servants prepared for departure, Julian found Clara alone in the small kitchen, where she was stirring broth more from habit than necessity. "Miss Ellison," he said quietly. Clara turned, trying to summon composure. "You are leaving." He nodded. His gaze held hers with a seriousness that made her breath catch. "I did not ask for this interruption to your life." "No," Clara said softly. "The road brought you." "And I will never forget what it gave me," Julian replied. He hesitated, then added, "I fear I shall discover how much I have lost only after I have left." Clara's hands trembled slightly on the spoon. "You cannot remain," she said, though it sounded like an argument against herself more than against him. Julian's voice dropped. "No." A silence stretched between them, full of things that could not be spoken in a kitchen with a house full of listening walls. He bowed slightly, formal as if formality could disguise pain. "Thank you, Miss Ellison, for everything." Clara managed, "Safe journey." He left before she could betray the tears she refused to shed. The carriage rolled away. The lane was empty again. The quiet returned, but it was no longer the same quiet. In the weeks that followed, Clara moved through her days as though the world had become slightly less vivid. She walked the familiar lane, but it felt wider. She read by the fire, but the room seemed colder. Even her sketches lacked the life they once had, as if her hand could not quite remember how to draw a future. Mrs. Ellison watched her daughter carefully but did not press. Her mother had always known that Clara's heart was not weaker for being guarded, it was simply more deliberate in choosing where to belong. Then, one evening in February, another letter arrived. This one bore the Earl's seal again, but the tone, Mrs. Ellison said after reading it, was different. "He invites us to Winthrop Hall," her mother said, eyebrow raised. "It appears your Mr. Harcourt has spoken of us often." Clara's throat tightened. "He is not my Mr. Harcourt." Mrs. Ellison's eyes softened. Not yet, perhaps. Clara felt heat rush to her cheeks. "Mother!" Mrs. Ellison held up a hand. "Clara, I will not tease you, but I will say this. A man does not speak often of a quiet cottage and its inhabitants unless something in that cottage mattered to him." Clara stared at the letter. Her heart hammered. She had fled society. She had fought for this life. Yet the invitation stirred something in her that she could not deny. A pull, not toward the glitter of a great house, but toward Julian himself. They accepted. Winthrop Hall was grand, but not garish. Its stone facade rose with restrained dignity, surrounded by bare trees and winter lawns. The entrance hall was warm, filled with the scent of polished wood and beeswax candles. Julian met them at the steps. He looked healthier. Colour returned to his cheeks, his hair neatly combed, his arm still in a sling but less rigid. Yet his expression when he saw Clara held something almost unguarded, relief, perhaps, or gratitude sharpened into something more. "I'm glad you came," he said quietly as he helped them inside. Clara kept her expression calm. "Your uncle invited us." Julian's eyes held hers. "And I wanted you here." Before Clara could respond, the Earl approached, courteous and composed. He welcomed them formally, offered rooms, and assured Mrs. Ellison that they were honoured guests. Yet Clara felt, even in her initial hours at Winthrop Hall, the familiar pressures of rank. Servants watched. Lady visitors arrived. Conversations carried hidden purposes. A young woman with bright eyes and too much confidence glanced at Julian, as if already accustomed to possessing him. Clara's stomach tightened. She reminded herself sharply, "This is what you left." But Julian sought her out whenever he could. In the library, he spoke with her about books, about travel, about the ways a person might keep integrity within a system designed to reward imitation. "You were right," he said one evening, voice low as they stood near the window overlooking snow-covered grounds. "Society is exhausting." Clara's gaze remained fixed on the landscape. "Then why return to it?" Julian's mouth tightened. "Because I believed duty required it. But now I wonder if duty can include choosing what is true." That sentence lingered in Clara's mind long after they parted. The suitable match soon revealed itself. Miss Arabella Thorne, a young lady of respectable family and undeniable charm, who had apparently been positioned by her mother with practiced precision. Arabella laughed easily, touched Julian's sleeve without permission, and spoke of the future as though it were already arranged. Clara watched from a polite distance, her face composed, her heart quietly bruised. Mrs. Ellison found her later in the corridor and said softly, "Do not wound yourself with assumptions." Clara's voice was tight. "He belongs to this world." "Perhaps," Mrs. Ellison said, "but belonging is sometimes a choice, not an inheritance." Clara looked away, unable to answer. 2 days later, the tension snapped, not in scandal, but in truth. It happened after dinner, when the Earl summoned Julian to his study. Clara, passing by on her way to fetch a book she had forgotten in the library, heard voices through the half-closed door. "I cannot pretend I do not see it," the Earl was saying, his tone controlled but strained. "You have become attached." Julian's voice was low but firm. "I have." "To a young lady with no fortune and no position," the Earl said, and with a mother who fled society for reasons she will not explain. Julian's voice sharpened. They fled because society can be cruel. The Earl exhaled slowly. And you think you can protect her from that cruelty by bringing her into it? Julian answered without hesitation. I think she is stronger than society. A pause. Then the Earl said quietly, I was prepared to marry you to Miss Thorne because it would be easy. It would be expected. But I did not anticipate. You did not anticipate I would want something real, Julian said. Silence again. Clara stepped back from the door, her heart pounding. She had not meant to listen, yet she could not erase what she had heard. Julian loved her. The knowledge both warmed and terrified her, because love was not only an emotion, love was a decision, and decisions carried consequences. Chapter 4. The Year Chosen. The next morning, Clara walked alone on the grounds, desperate for the clarity that snow and cold had always given her. The estate's gardens were quiet, paths edged in frost. The lake beyond lay frozen, pale under the sky. She walked until her cheeks stung and her thoughts felt raw. She found herself in a small stone pavilion near the winter rose bushes, bare now, their beauty hidden until spring. Julian was there. He stood with his back to her, hands clasped behind him, staring out at the frozen landscape as though trying to read an answer in it. When he heard her footsteps, he turned. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Julian said quietly, You heard. Clara's breath caught. I did not mean to. I am not angry, Julian interrupted. Only relieved, perhaps, because I am tired of guarding the truth. Clara's fingers tightened on the edge of her cloak. What truth? His gaze held hers, steady and unflinching. That I love you. That what I found at Ashcombe Vale was not merely recovery. It was peace. It was honesty. It was the first time in years that I felt I could be simply myself. Clara swallowed hard. Julian. He stepped closer, but not too close. He did not touch her. The restraint mattered. It told her he respected her boundaries even when his heart was laid bare. I know what you fear, he said. You fear society will swallow you. You fear you will become a version of yourself that is shaped by other people's expectations. Clara's voice was almost a whisper. Yes. Julian nodded, as if that truth itself was sacred. Then do not come into society for society's sake. Come only if you choose it for your own. And if you cannot choose it, then I will not demand it. Clara stared at him. You would give up Winthrop Hall? Julian's mouth tightened. I would not give up my uncle. I would not abandon duty. But duty does not require me to marry without love. And love does not require you to abandon your soul. Clara felt her throat tighten. But they will judge me, she said. They will call me ambitious, or strange, or ungrateful. They will say I ensnared you. Julian's eyes flashed. Let them. They do not know you. Clara's breath trembled. And what if they make you regret it? Julian's voice softened. I have regretted far more by choosing what was expected. I will not regret choosing what is true. Clara looked away, the frozen lake blurring in her vision. She had lived quietly not because she feared love, but because she feared losing herself. Yet love, real love, did not ask her to become false. Julian was not asking her to perform. He was asking her to be seen. Slowly, Clara turned back to him. I do not know how to live in your world, she said. Julian's expression was tender. Then we will build a world that is ours. Clara's breath caught. How? I have spoken with my uncle, Julian said. He is not cruel. He is cautious. He has been disappointed before. He fears scandal, gossip, instability, but he is not without conscience. Clara frowned. He seemed determined. He was, Julian admitted, until he learned why your mother left society. Clara stiffened. My mother did not. Julian shook his head gently. I did not pry. She told him willingly. Clara's heart hammered. What did she tell him? Julian's gaze softened. That she was once ruined by gossip. Clara froze. Julian spoke quietly, as though careful not to wound her. She told him that after your father died, certain people whispered that she had manipulated him, that she had married above herself through deceit. It was untrue. But untrue gossip can be as destructive as truth. It made her wary. It made her protective of you. Clara's chest tightened painfully. Her mother had never spoken of this, not in detail. Clara had known they had left London partly because of discomfort, but she had not known the wound ran deeper. Julian continued. My uncle understands, not because he is sentimental, but because he has lived long enough to see how easily reputation can be used as a weapon. Clara whispered, And what does he intend? Julian's mouth curved slightly. He intends to meet you properly, not as a curiosity, not as a secret. He intends to judge you by your character. Clara's hands shook. He will not like me. Julian stepped closer, still not touching her. He will respect you, because you are honest, and because you did not chase me. You saved me without knowing who I was. That matters. Clara's eyes filled. She blinked quickly, angry at herself for softness. Julian's voice dropped. Clara, will you marry me? The question was not a performance. It was not a grand gesture. No kneeling, no theatrical flourish. Only the truth, offered with dignity. Clara inhaled, slow and trembling, as though the air itself had become difficult. She thought of Ashcombe Vale, of quiet mornings, of solitude that had once been enough. And she thought of Julian, broken in the snow, waking in her mother's spare room, speaking of honesty as though it were the only thing worth keeping. At last, Clara said softly, Yes. Julian's expression changed. Relief and joy held tightly in restraint, like fire cupped in hands. His voice was thick. Thank you. Clara managed a faint smile. Do not thank me. It is not charity. Julian's eyes warmed. No, he agreed. It is choice. The Earl received the news with less drama than Clara feared. He studied her carefully in the drawing room, asked her about Ashcombe Vale, about her reading, about her mother. Clara answered plainly. She did not flatter. She did not perform. At last, the Earl said quietly, You saved my nephew when you had no reason to do so. You cared for him when you could have sent him away. That speaks of character more than lineage ever could. Clara's throat tightened. My lord. He raised a hand. I will not pretend I have no concerns. The world will talk. It always does. But if you and my nephew are united in sense and integrity, then the world may talk itself hoarse. Then he looked at Julian. Do not make her regret this. Julian's voice was steady. I will spend my life proving she will not. The wedding took place in the spring, when the last frost had retreated and the hedgerows had begun to show green again. It was modest by aristocratic standards, attended by close friends and a handful of respectable relations. Clara wore a simple gown and her mother's pearls. Julian looked at her as though she were the only person in the world. After the vows, Mrs. Ellison's eyes shone, but she did not weep openly. She only held Clara's hands a little longer than usual and whispered, You have chosen well. They did not abandon Ashcombe Vale. Julian arranged matters so they could keep the cottage as a retreat, a place where Clara could breathe. They divided time between Winthrop Hall and the quiet Vale, building a life that did not demand Clara's surrender. 1 year later, on New Year's morning, snow fell again. Clara stood at the parlour window, just as she had the year before. But this time, Julian stood beside her, his hand resting close to hers, touching lightly, not claiming, only present. Outside, the fields lay white and peaceful. Smoke curled from the chimney. Julian's voice was soft. "Do you regret it?" Clara leaned slightly toward him, her gaze steady. "No." She looked at the snow, at the quiet, at the untouched year ahead. "It still feels unmarked," she said. "But now it feels shared." Julian's hand tightened gently over hers. The new year arrived quietly at Ashcombe Vale, and Clara welcomed it, gladly, wholly, and without fear. The end. Thank you, dear reader of the Regency Gazette, for joining us in another tale of love, intrigue, and whispered ballroom secrets. If today's romance delighted you, kindly bestow a like upon this video. It helps our Gazette reach more lovers of Regency storytelling. For weekly journeys into dukes, debutantes, scandals, and slow-burning devotion, please subscribe to the Gazette and tap the little bell so you are notified the moment the next story is published. Until our next edition, may your days be filled with grace and your nights with the promise of romance.